In the late 1920s and early 1930s, millions of Soviet citizens experienced a profound transformation in their life as private farms were consolidated into state-controlled collectives. This policy, known as collectivization, was aimed to accelerate industrialization in the Soviet Union under Stalin's leadership. The Soviet government sought to transform the nation into a global industrial power, but faced significant challenges such as insufficient factories, railroads, and machinery, a shortage of skilled workers, and a lack of capital to fund industrial projects. The proposed solution was the collectivization of agriculture by merging private farms into large state-controlled collectives. The Soviet government aimed to centralize food production to sustain the growing industrial workforce, export surplus grain to generate revenue for industrial equipment, and eliminate opposition from private landowners who resisted state policies. The impact of collectivization was especially severe in Kazakhstan, where nomadic herding was the primary way of life. Forced settlement and collectivization led to one of the most devastating humanitarian crises in Soviet history.
Collectivization was rooted in the Soviet ideology of transforming society according to communism principles. Stalin believed that collectivization was essential to eliminate the class of private landowners, kulaks, and to consolidate socialist control over the countryside. By dismantling the traditional agrarian structure, the government aimed to create a more centralized and planned economy that could support rapid industrialization. Stalin justified this policy as necessary for survival and advancement of socialism. In Kazakhstan, Philip Goloshokin led the implementation of collectivization. His Small October campaign aimed to rapidly transform Kazakhstan by forcefully setting nomadic population and collectivization agriculture. The Soviet government imposed forcing grain collective quotas, often led and widespread starvation in rural areas. Farmers who recited this measure were labeled as kulaks and were either arrested, exiled, or executed. By 1931, over 5 million persons had been deported to Siberia or Kazakhstan, with many of them never returned. Despite these efforts, collectivization failed to improve agricultural production. Farmers had little motivation to produce extra food as they no longer owned the land, and bureaucratic interference meant much of the collected grain was lost, rotted, or stolen before reaching cities. Between 1932 and 1933, the Soviet Union experienced one of the worst famines in history, with millions of people dying across the country, while Russia and Ukraine suffered immensely. Kazakhstan had the highest death rate.
Kazakhstan was distinct from the rest of the Soviet Union. Unlike Russia and Ukraine, which had vast grain fields, Kazakhstan relied on livestock, millions of sheep, horses, and cattle moving across the steppe. In 1929, the Soviet government sought to eliminate nomadism. Kazakhs were forced to settle permanently instead of moving with their herds, hand over their animals to collective farms, and plant crops, despite Kazakhstan's dry climate making large-scale farming nearly impossible. The result was catastrophic. Between 1929 and 1932, Kazakhstan lost 90% of its livestock, either seized by the state or slaughtered by desperate herders. The Kazakh famine of 1931-33 killed 1.5 million people, nearly one-third of the population. Thousands attempted to flee to China or other Soviet republics, but Stalin sealed the borders and many were shot while fleeing.
In conclusion, industrialization in the Soviet Union was impossible without collectivization because the state needed to control and maximize agricultural production to feed the urban workforce and generate revenue for industrial projects. Collectivization also aligned with the ideological goal of consolidating socialism by eliminating private land ownership. In Kazakhstan, the implementation of collectivization led to catastrophic consequences, including the disruption of nomadic traditions, mass starvations, and a significant population loss. While the Soviet Union achieved industrial might, it came at the expense of immense human suffering and cultural destruction. Today, Kazakhstan remembers the horrors of collectivization as a painful chapter in its history.